Hi, I am Pete Nichols, Chief Executive of Parents Beyond Breakup, and welcome to those joining us here in the room in Perth and those joining us online across Australia and internationally. For those new to this series, ANZPAC events run monthly from a different location around Australia and New Zealand, and each features a different expert bringing their own unique perspective to the matter of parental alienation. Today, we're broadcasting live from Perth in WA, or Western Australia, I should say, from the Perth Convention Centre. Here, we've been attending the National Australian Suicide Prevention Conference this past 3 days. And outside of other PA-related matters, it is our position that there is very likely a link between parental alienation and suicide, particularly of targeted parents. And more recently, we've started seeing cases of children taking their life. With that in mind, our first guest speaker today, Professor of Applied Psychology Ben Hine from London, England, will touch upon this very link. After Ben, we have Glen Poole and Bettina Arndt, and we will introduce those individually as they come up. Just by way of introduction, Glen is a POM like myself. He's come to Australia over a decade ago, and he's made an enormous inroad in the national understanding of male suicide, both in his capacity as founder of the Stop Male Suicide event series that's been going for some years now, in fact, quite a few years, but also as current CEO of the Australian Men's Health Forum. Most importantly, Glen has direct lived experience of this matter as well. But without further ado, I'll jump to Glen, and we'll put to Glen 4 key questions, which we put to all of our guests at each one of these events. And over time, we collate the answers and do a little bit of analysis of what are those different perspectives based on where people come from and the work that they do. So, Glen, if I might come to you, in your opinion, what is parental alienation?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me here, Pete, and thanks for facilitating this very important conversation. I'd also like to say that I think I first encountered Dads in Distress maybe in around about 2010, 2011, before your time, certainly. And it's such an important organization, and the world is a better place for having dads in distress out there providing support for dads going through separation across Australia. And in terms of my own personal experience, it's long in the past now, but it's something that shaped my life. So my one child, my daughter, is 28 this year, on the way to 28, and her mum and I split up in 1999. So my experience of being a separated dad myself and going through all the challenges that many of you will be familiar with dates back to the last century. So I've been in this conversation in different ways for over 25 years now. I think in really simple terms, I'm not an academic, and I don't come at this from a research perspective or a clinical perspective, or indeed would claim to be an expert, but I have lots of experience. And I think in really simple terms, most of us would relate to or understand parental alienation as when one parent turns the child against the other. I think that's the most simple language we can use that people down the pub would understand. And I'm a big one for simplifying ideas, because the more we simplify them, the more we can actually help people understand them and support a wider conversation about them. To be a bit more technical, I suppose I would say it's about a process of exclusion and estrangement of one parent from a child by the other. And to me, this is not a clinical perspective, but I see it as being a range of behaviours on a spectrum. I think so something like which largely happens in the context of separated parents. And if you've engaged with lots of separated parents over the years, you'll hear lots of stories of different types of contact interference. So it's usually one parent has more power or control or authority or time, whatever you want to call it, than the other parent, which creates this inequality between the two parents, and often that can be misused and even abused. And the most simple way is that it'll be an interference with contact, which can be very upsetting and distressing distressing. And the extreme end of that spectrum, all contact is cut off. And similarly, you could look at, say, something like bad-mouthing the other parent, which is, clearly something which we'll all be familiar with happening in separated contexts. And, that starts with a bit of bad-mouthing and slagging off and, being upset is not unusual in separated contexts. But it can extend to sort of like abuse and demonization, any lies and false allegation, to the point where actually a child turns against the parent and has this view. I've often talked to parents in this context, and it's, for them, it's like there are two versions of them alive in the world. There's the version of them that they know, and then this beast, this monster that's been created by the stories that the other parents told about them. So I think all those things can happen in separation and aren't necessarily parental alienation. They're just really hostile separation. But nonetheless, it can be very traumatic to deal with. I think it's important to say that both men and women can be the alienators, and both men and women can be the target parent. And I think it's also important to say that not every absent parent is alienated. There are different reasons why parents become absent and not part of their child's lives. And they can be the responsibility for that, or the reasons for that, can really vary. So just because someone's not in their child's life doesn't mean to say they're alienated. But I think the final thing I'd like to say about what parent alienation is it is a thing. It exists. It's real, because, we're still in a situation where it's not largely accepted that it's something that actually happens a lot of the time.
Well, Glenn, look, thank you for sharing your perspectives on what it is. I think what we'd like to explore as well now is, do you have a position on parental alienation? And if so, what do you base this on?
Yeah, okay. So I'm not going to say I've got a position. I would say I would like to bring a particular perspective. I think there's lots of different ways of looking at it. You can look at it as if it's, you can frame it like it's child abuse. You can frame it like it's family and domestic violence. You can frame it like it's a clinical issue that impacts the child, a clinical issue that impacts the targeted parent. You could even look at it as a disordered way of being, in terms of a disorder that the alienating parent has. They've got some kind of psychological disorder that's causing them to behave in this way. And I think all of those are valid, and there may be others I haven't thought about. But I'd really like to look at it from my area of focus, which is from men's health. So having said, and I'm really clear about this, it's something that both men and women can do to men and women. I'm most interested in the impact on dads who are alienated, because that's most of the experience I've had, and most of my work is in men's health. So I'd like to sort of, if you don't mind, Pete, for a few minutes, explore. And this is just like, I'm really just, this is, an exploration in this conversation, because you've invited me to sort of, come and have a chat of what it looks like if we view it from a kind of men's health perspective. So let me sort of first set out what my approach to men's health is personally. So I don't view men's health as just being about, blokes going to the GP or being overweight or smoking or drinking, all of these things, or, having cancer checks. All of these things are part of health, but I take a much broader kind of strengths-based social determinant view of health. So I'm really interested in what are the things that make us well at a population level. It's things like the level of education we get. It's things like the work we do. It's things like our daily living conditions, our housing environment, the relationships and social connections we have, the opportunities we have in life. There's massive disparities in the quality of our health based on just our economic status, right? So all of these things are what we call social determinants. And one of the key social determinants for me, which hasn't really been explored enough from my perspective, is what I would call our experiences of fatherhood. And they come from two particular directions. One is our experiences as men and boys in particular of being fathered. What were our experiences? What was our relationship like with our father? That really has a massive impact on who we become as men. So I'm really interested in both the positive and negative impact the presence of a father figure has on particularly a boy's life, but on children's lives. And so therefore, if we look at, I would assert from a parental alienation perspective, if a father's not present, then it has a negative impact on a boy's life. And when I'm saying this, I'm not going to talk about women and girls so much. So, when I'm saying it has a negative impact on boys' lives, please understand that I also think it has a positive impact, a negative positive impact on girls' lives too. But I'm really focusing on boys because I'm interested in men's health. It's not to diminish the experiences of women and girls. This is a both-and conversation, with my area of focus being men and boys. So the absence of a father definitely has a negative impact in general on a boy's life, and therefore on his health and well-being going on into life. And there are different ways and different reasons why a father may be absent, and alienation is one of them. And I think fathers are particularly vulnerable to being alienated because of biology. We have a very different pathway to parenthood compared to women. I don't need to educate you. You know that we don't carry a baby for 9 months. You know, we don't give birth to a baby. You know, we don't breastfeed. So the beginning of our relationship as a parent is very different. Hormonally, psychologically, socially, it's very different. We're already on the outside from the start, and we have to work our way into the lives of our child. We're also more likely to be not at home. Still, for all the changes in the way that mums and dads share parenting, it's still the norm that fathers will spend more time at work, more time away from the child. And so when separation happens, it's still very much the norm that father is nearly always by default the secondary parent. So there's something already in the different relationships that the mothers and fathers have with their children that puts men at greater vulnerability. In fact, I would say there is a greater tolerance of fathers not being involved in their children's life than there is of mothers not being involved in their children's life. So men have a particular risk, and we've become increasingly accepting of that. And I think that's a concern. I think it's something that we shouldn't be accepting of. I think we should demand better. I think we should want as a society to have more fathers more involved in their children's lives and put every support we can in there, because I think that's a really protective factor against alienation. Certainly see it in a separated context. If you look at, you look at the risk of being excluded from your child's life or sidelined in your child's life when you separate. The more you have been involved, the less likely it is that you'll be sidelined. It doesn't completely prevent that from happening, but it's less likely. The more there's a norm of dad being involved early on, the less likely that sort of alienation is. And I don't think we as a society make it very easy for dads to be fully and equally involved. We complain when they're not, but then we don't put supports in place and provide parental leave pay and have workplaces that support that and all the rest of it. And I think then also I would like to look at separation. To me, when you've got kids, is nearly always harmful at some level. It's nearly always, you could almost say it's always harmful at some level. Now, there are things you can do to mitigate the harm. You can get through it. Life shouldn't be just a whole pathway of ease and no challenges. That would be a very dull life. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing. You could make an argument that in some cases it's actually a better thing that certain parents do separate. But I would say pretty much all separation is harmful at some extent. And again, that's a spectrum. And at the extreme end of that spectrum, what we see is, now let me talk a bit about the spectrum. Separation can, it makes it financially more difficult, which puts strain on people involved. We see that dads will, often turn to drinking or poorer health. Their housing conditions may be worse. Their emotional well-being is worse because they're no longer in their kids' lives all their time. So separation can have a really negative impact on men's health and well-being. And at the extreme end of that is suicide. And we know that there's a really strong correlation between separation and suicide. In fact, there's just been, this will be no surprise to most people who've been in this conversation, and there's plenty of angry advocates making very extreme claims about, pretty much every suicide being linked to separation in the family courts, and that's not true. There are lots of pathways to suicide, but separation is certainly one of them. There's some very strong research that came out very recently in Australia, which showed that men who've separated in the last 12 months were twice as likely as other men to have had suicidal thoughts. And so we didn't need the academics to tell us that, but the academic research is out there also. And then in some of those cases, there's an overlap between separation, suicide, and alienation. And so alienation to me is definitely a suicide risk. Separation is definitely a suicide risk, and separation and alienation are definitely things which negatively impact men's health, and then going forward also have a negative impact on a boy who's an alienated child, one of those what you call them ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which we know increases risk on all levels, increases risk of being a drug taker, of drinking too much, of having mental health issues, of suiciding later in life. So there's this generational knock-on effect. So from a men's health perspective, alienation is a risk factor for suicide, for poor health, and for the long-term health of the child, boy. I'm talking about boys here, who's been alienated. So it really is an issue we should consider as a public health issue.
Okay, well, Glenn, thank you. I think to some extent you've already answered parts of the next question, but I was going to ask, what changes do you think need to occur and why?
Okay, so I'm going to go from a broader context. So if I'm framing alienation in the context of men's health, I think just the whole way that we approach the issues that men and boys face is just messed up. And it's really tough to actually make the case that men and boys need support. I think it's tough. Whatever framework we look at gender in, I think it's tough if you look at it from a traditional sort of conservative perspective, and I think it's tough if you look at it from more of a progressive perspective, just as two examples. So to simplify, the view of gender in the traditional worldview is women and children first. So where do men come in that hierarchy? Yeah. And then the view of gender in the more progressive perspective is women and girls first. So where do men and boys come in that hierarchy? We're not very good at actually balancing the needs of men and boys and the needs of women and girls. We are good. I'm going to talk about harm. We are good at thinking about men and boys from the perspective of harm. There's three key ways we can think about the perspective of harm. There's the harm we do to others, there's the harm we do to ourselves, and there's the harm that others do to us. So we're really good at pointing out the harm that men do to others. Just turn on the news. And, there's justification for that too. We're getting better at recognizing the harm that men do to themselves as well. So often we frame men's health in, well, it's because men drink, and it's because men smoke, and suicide's because men don't get help, and it's their fault, it's they're to blame. But we're really, really not comfortable with having conversations about the way others harm men, other individuals, systems, society. And I think we need to get better at that, because if we don't get better at that, then we can't acknowledge men, fathers, as victims of parental alienation. So it's a big change for me. And then just to make something more specific, I think we need to get better at sort of making the case for society needs to get better at making the case that men's suicide, that the alienation of fathers, that damage to boys are issues that we should focus on. And whilst I understand it, angry advocacy doesn't help us. It just gives people a reason to dismiss the cause. And particularly in suicide prevention, we need better research on we all know that separation impacts is linked to suicide, but do you know how hard it is to actually get government statistics on how many men's suicides each year are actually fathers of children who have separated? You can get information on relationship breakdown, but it doesn't tell us specifically how many are fathers of children and how many have experienced alienation. That data is we have the capacity to find that data, but we don't go looking for it. So we need that data. And in that vacuum, you get wild claims that, you know, every single suicide, male suicide, is linked to the family courts and separation and alienation. Those wild claims don't help us. And one of the things those wild claims upset me is because A, it doesn't help us, but B, it diminishes all the other reasons why men take their lives, because not every suicide is about family courts and family breakdown. It's a big factor, but there are lots of other reasons why men take their lives, and we mustn't diminish their experience. So can't get too angry at angry activists, because, you know, I'd rather be angry at the system that's not actually highlighting the issue, but we need to be wary of too many angry activists and provide a balancing voice. Passionate, intelligent advocates, and not too many angry activists.
Thank you for that, Glenn. And look, just in one or two lines, because I think we're running a little bit over. What is it you think that the person viewing this could do today to help themselves?
Like an individual in the situation?
Yes, someone watching this that's going through it right now or experiencing this. What is it that you would say to them from your perspective they could or should do?
That's so tough, isn't it? It's so tough because it's one of the most frustrating things in dealing with men in the separated context, never mind alienation, is that pretty much every man, if you just gave them like an IKEA map, well, maybe one that was a little bit easier to follow than IKEA, but, you know, a little map that said, if you do A, B, C, and D, then this will be resolved, then pretty much every man would do it. But there is no A, B, C, D. It's really tough. There's no one thing to do, but I think find a way to connect with helpful peers, because knowing that there are other people who have been through this, and whilst it's really tough, are managing to cope with it and find ways forward, you cannot underestimate how important that is to help you keep going, because one day, you have to believe, one day your children will want to know you. And when that day comes, you want to be in the best position you can be to welcome them with open arms. So take care of yourself, try and connect with peers, and remember that one day when your children show up, you want to be ready for that moment.
Glenn, thank you so much for that, and for the shameless plug for peer support, which obviously we provide as an organisation. I do think it's one of the most effective ways to provide help by connecting with others who've gone through it, who know what it is they need to do.